In a few moments, I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education once and for all.
In a move that could reshape American education for generations, President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to eliminate the Department of Education. Supporters claim it gives power back to the states. Critics warn it's an attack on public schooling that will hurt millions of students. But what does this actually mean for your child, your state, and the future of education in America? Let's break it down.
Well, what I'd like to say to Randy Weingarten is she didn't seem all that concerned about money flowing in when she had schools closed down during COVID. I think that was an incredible detrimental program to our students.
The Department of Education was created in 1979, but many of its key programs, such as Title I, Low-Income Schools, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, were established by Congress long before the department existed. These two programs alone account for over $30 billion in federal funding to local school districts. Since these programs were enacted through legislation, a president cannot unilaterally end them. Doing so would require an act of Congress. The executive order cites a goal of shifting education authority to states and local communities, with the vague assurance that services Americans rely on will remain effective and uninterrupted. However, the phrase "to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law" underscores the limits of presidential authority.
I can tell you we know that the task ahead certainly has some hurdles. But what my desire is, and what I'm going to be working to do, is to work in conjunction with Congress. I think if we can show them that the best plan is to have states in control of education for their communities, for their students, for their teachers, for their parents, that is the best thing, because the president believes, as do I, that the best education is closest to the student, and we can accomplish that by having it operate out of the state and not trying to manage it from Washington, D.C., which clearly, Brett, that hasn't worked. The Department of Education was set up in 1980 by President Carter. We've spent almost $3 trillion. We've seen our scores continue to decline. We're doing something wrong. We need to change.
While President Trump cannot legally dissolve the Department of Education without congressional approval, his administration can still take significant steps to reduce its influence and budget. By leveraging executive actions, regulatory changes, and strategic defunding, Trump can effectively hollow out the department and shift education policy towards state and private control. While Trump cannot outright dissolve DOE without congressional approval, he can continue hollowing it out by reducing personnel. Reports from CNN indicate that offices such as the Office for Civil Rights and the National Center for Education Statistics have already suffered major staff reductions. As shown in Education Reform Now's analysis, student loan repayment terms, forgiveness, and interest rates can be changed via reconciliation. The Secretary of Education can redirect some discretionary grant funds towards school choice initiatives, but large-scale funding changes require legislative action. The administration can halt enforcement of regulations and remove funding from federal oversight programs. Trump's Department of Education has already deprioritized civil rights investigations, and further cuts could weaken enforcement mechanisms protecting students from discrimination. The immediate impact: a massive shakeup in school funding. In most states, about 85% of education funding comes from local and state governments, while the federal government covers the remaining 15%. Without the DOE, states will lose billions in federal support. Wealthy states, they'll likely absorb the loss. But poorer states, especially those reliant on federal funding, will face devastating cuts. That means fewer teachers, larger class sizes, and schools shutting down. This means if you live in a red state, your schools will probably struggle more than those in blue states, where local governments have higher tax revenues to compensate for the cuts. Perhaps the hardest hit group: children with disabilities. The DOE enforces the ID Act, which guarantees students with disabilities the right to education and accommodations. Without federal oversight, enforcement of these protections is left up to the states, many of which have already underfunded special education. This could lead to massive disparities where wealthier states continue providing robust support while poorer states struggle to maintain even the most basic services. In the worst-case scenario, some students could be left without the resources they need to succeed in school, forcing families to fight legal battles or relocate in search of better support. It's not just K-12 education feeling the impact. Trump's executive order may dismantle the Department of Education, but key programs like federal student loans and Pell Grants will remain. At least for now. However, with the department being stripped of its regulatory authority, the future of these programs remains uncertain. Who will oversee loan repayment plans, prevent predatory lending, or ensure that low-income students continue to receive the aid they need? Many smaller colleges, which rely heavily on federal student aid, could face financial instability or even closure if funding delays or administrative gaps emerge during the transition. For students, this means potential disruptions in tuition assistance, fewer protections from rising loan interest rates, and increased financial barriers to higher education. The question is, what's the replacement plan? So far, there isn't one.
But the department's useful functions, and such as, and they're in charge of them, Pell Grants, Title I funding, resources for children with disabilities and special needs will be preserved, fully preserved. They're all going to be so. If you look at the Pell Grants, it's supposed to be a very good program, Title I funding.
But the president is clear about the funding that is going to continue to go to schools. And look, we've said we're going to work with different agencies. Where might some of the programs fit best? For instance, today, he stated that student loans were going to go over to SBA, and I've had a good conversation with Administrator Loeffler already about that, and we're going to work on a strategic plan together. We've talked also with Treasury and how can they be interactive in that process. Some of the IDEA programs return to HHS, and that's where they started. You know, Title I funding was in place before there was a Department of Education. IDEA funding for our children with disabilities and special needs was in place before there was a Department of Education, and it managed to work incredibly well. Since the Department of Education was established, we've spent over $3 trillion and watched our scores continue to go down. So I am not worried at all about continuing the funding and putting more money into the hands of the states for the state departments of education, the governors, the teachers, and believe me, we want parents involved in their children's education. I think that's crucial for the success to see our scores go up in those in all of the states.
Yeah. Trump's Project 2025 policy blueprint proposes turning Title I and IDEA funds into block grants, giving states full discretion over how to use the money. The plan also aims to phase out Title I funding entirely within 10 years. This approach could drastically reshape K-12 funding, with states deciding how to allocate funds without federal oversight. Education policy expert Bruce Baker, writing for the Albert Shanker Institute, warns that eliminating federal aid would lead to significant declines in student achievement, particularly for low-income and special education students. He also notes that block grants could worsen achievement gaps if states do not allocate funds based on need. Additionally, according to a leaked policy memo from the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025 seeks to expand education savings accounts, a voucher-like system that would divert public school funding to private and religious schools. This could further reduce public school funding and accelerate school privatization. In total, the Department of Education's budget exceeds $200 billion, including student aid, grants, and research funding. If Trump's plan succeeds, key funding allocations could look drastically different. But there's a darker theory. Some believe dismantling public education isn't just about policy, it's about control. An educated population is a dangerous population for authoritarian rule. That's why regimes like the Khmer Rouge eliminated intellectuals first. Destroying public education is step one in dismantling democracy. Could this be a long-term effort to weaken public knowledge and critical thinking? It's a question worth asking. Despite today's executive order, the future of education policy remains uncertain. Trump has officially declared his intent to close the Department of Education, but his administration faces major legal and logistical roadblocks. The real battle will unfold in Congress, where any permanent changes require legislative approval. For now, the only clear takeaway is that Trump is serious about dismantling DOE, but what that will look like in practice remains to be seen. The biggest unknown is whether Congress will push back or if Republicans will embrace the most radical education overhaul in decades.
And it sounds strange, doesn't it? Department of Education, we're going to eliminate it, and everybody knows it's right. And the Democrats know it's right, and I hope they're going to be voting for it because ultimately it may come before them. But everybody knows it's right, and we have to get our children educated. We're not doing well with the world of education in this country, and we haven't for a long time. And we're pleased to be joined today by the woman who I chose because she's an extraordinary person. And hopefully she will be our last Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. Linda, thank you. Thank you very much. That's another interesting statement. It's an interesting opening, right? But it's true, and it's been amazing how popular this has been. I tell people that this is what I'm doing today. And they say, oh, it's about time. Everybody says it. Republicans and Democrats have said it, and they're all saying it. Also with us are